Hello, and welcome to our presentation, Recognizing and Inviting Leadership Philosophies and Theories into WAC Scholarship and Program Development. Our panel emerged from our group's interest in understanding how leadership frameworks and philosophies inform the work that we do as WAC leaders. The four presentations on our panel today can be generally categorized into two big picture or landscape examinations of WAC leadership, and two localized, institutionally situated examples of WAC leadership. We'll introduce ourselves first in the order that we'll be presenting. We'll be sharing our names and institutions and our WAC programs and the tribal lands where our universities or where our physical bodies are located. So I will start. My name is Lisa Tremaine. I'm a newly tenured associate professor at Humboldt State University, where we are about to launch the Center for Engaged Writing. So it's a new WAC initiative. Humboldt State University is in the deep northwest of California, and it is the institution and my home where I'm presenting to you from are located on unceded WAC land. Caitlin.
Hello, I'm Caitlin Martin, and beginning in just a few days of this viewing, I'll officially be an assistant professor of composition in the Department of Humanities and Communication at Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University in Daytona Beach, which is located on the ancestral territory of the Ajes and Calusa peoples. And today these tribes are grouped together with many other Florida indigenous peoples as the Seminoles.
Hi everyone, I'm Crystal Fodry from Moravian University. We just became a university on July 1st. We were a college before then. And I am an associate professor of English and director of the Writing at Moravian program. Moravian University and my home, from which I'm speaking today, stand in the Lenape-Hoking, the Lenape people's ancestral territory.
Hi everyone, my name is Nelson Graff. I'm at California State University, Monterey Bay. I'm professor of and director of communication across the disciplines. And Monterey Bay and my home stand on the unceded territory of the Assalin people.
So that's our panel. Let's get started. Everybody, panelists, just let me know when you want me to switch slides too. Writing across the curriculum as a movement has offered various models to our fast-growing field, but much like the work on writing program administration, WAC scholarship has tended to articulate WAC in ways that emphasize management or programmatic design and structural perspectives. We acknowledge that these elements are certainly parts of WAC leadership, but our panel presents today that there is much more to discuss about how leadership philosophies and theories can integrate into WAC development. On this slide, we offer guiding questions that we considered when developing our presentation. We're interested in how leadership is represented in the scholarship on WAC, how we describe leadership to each other and to our communities, how theories of WAC and leadership intersect, and what conversations about these topics might reveal. Our conference theme for IWAC this year asks us to engage in thoughtful consideration about the challenges facing the WAC movement. We want to acknowledge that a major challenge of WAC work concerns how white supremacy and racial inequities are addressed in WAC contexts and how equitable and anti-racist activism in WAC might be enacted. This must include deep examinations and reckonings with how whiteness operates in educational institutions. And we acknowledge the ways that whiteness is embodied and operates on this panel as representative of WAC work. We believe as a panel that our work in WAC must include active and visible commitment to social and racial justice, and that these commitments must be integrated in how we theorize leadership. And though racial and social justice isn't a specific focus of this panel, we will be touching on it here and there as related to the work that we do. So a definition. We articulate leadership not only as the day-to-day maintenance of a program, but also as a process of vision setting and transformation. And we'll get back to these words, vision, setting, and transformation, throughout the presentation today. In this section of our panel, I take up the first question a couple of slides ago to look at a slice of how we've used the term leadership so far in the scholarship. So what I'll be sharing with you in the subsequent slides is a qualitative coding experiment of the WAC journal from 2002 to 2020, where I looked at how often terms like leadership was brought up across those journals, but I also looked at other terms related to WAC leadership work. Caitlin's presentation, which follows this one, drills down into different ways that into some of the data points that I'll share with you. A limitation to this, my part of the presentation, is that it's just a partial view. It's a slice of how leadership is used in the scholarly discourse on WAC. And I wanted to establish some context for what I'm going to show you to underscore the broader purpose of our panel and of my part of the presentation. So to begin my analysis, I first looked at the Statement of WAC Principles from 2014, which was reviewed and revised in 2016. This statement is about 7 pages. It's 3,202 words. And in this Statement of WAC Principles, there are 4 usages, or leadership is used as a term 4 times. The first usage is on page 2, and it is part of a sentence that reads, WAC programs require administrative support, such as course releases for program leadership. So this positions leadership as a role in the program, but does not necessarily theorize it. And this idea of leadership as a role comes up again in the subsequent qualitative work that I'm going to show you. The third instance of leadership shows up also on page 2 as part of a heading to a longer section where it mentions that successful and sustainable WAC program leadership is often guided by the following principles and practices. And then it's followed by some really, really useful principles and practices of WAC leadership, but it is not mentioned in these principles and practices that WAC leaders might want to read about leadership theory, or attend conferences on leadership, or to theorize leadership, or to learn from each other about leadership perspectives, vision setting, and transformation approaches. So to begin, the major part of my analysis was a corpus analysis. I turned first to the WAC journal because it is a flagship journal in our field, but it's important to note that there are many other places that we can find and analyze WAC scholarship across the disciplines and various other scholarly journals that talk about WAC. I used the corpus analysis freeware called AntConc that I learned about at the Dartmouth Summer Institute. It's a great, easily usable freeware that's available online at the link that I've noted in the slide. And there are a bunch of really helpful videos to learn how to use this corpus analysis software. I looked at word frequency and concordance, or words in context. And I also looked at words via their case, that is, leader, leading, leadership, or transform and transformation, to count word frequency. And what I'm sharing with you today is just an initial pass over this really large corpus. There's lots of raw data and big picture views that I'm about to share with you. And I will be moving toward deeper subcategorization work and deeper analysis in terms of how these words are used in context. I used both open coding and concept-driven deductive coding. I was interested in both word frequency, like what words were showing up and at what frequency, but also I wanted to look at how often specific words showed up in the corpus, such as leadership or vision. I think the only thing that is interesting to say about this slide is that There were 873,684 words in the total corpus. And the 22,807 word types means those are words that are repeated, and is repeated, many, many times. So what you look for in word frequency is words that occur in the parabolic curve. And that's, if you want to know more about that, feel free to contact me. Once I had a sense of the frequency of terms, which I'll be showing you on the next slides, I grouped them into initial themes of WAC leadership. There may be more themes that emerge in subsequent passes of this corpus, and these themes themselves may evolve, but this is where this first pass landed. So how WAC happens, the value of WAC, what it offers to the field or to the institution, and how well we're theorizing WAC leadership in the corpus. So we'll look at the corpus analysis in terms of word frequency according to those three themes. So the first theme is how WAC happens. I want you to pay attention to the frequency, the numbers going down the right side of the table here, because you'll start to notice some distinct differences when we get to leadership. So for example, support was mentioned across the corpus 581 distinct times. Development, which often was preceded by words such as faculty or professional, was mentioned 542 times. The value of WAC, what it offers to the field or to the institution, had the term pedagogy at its most frequently used term, and then sort of a drop in numbers down to assessment, discipline, disciplinary, and transfer. I included interdisciplinary because that was a word that I was interested in, how this is maybe another thread that could be taken up in terms of this corpus analysis, like how much we're talking about interdisciplinary connections. But here we get into leadership and WAC. You can see that we're talking a lot about change, the word change often preceded by institutional, programmatic, or cultural. But we are not talking that much, or at least using the term leader or leadership very often, or even less words like transformation and vision. And then this is leadership and WAC in service to the exigencies of social justice, but also they preview a bit of what you'll see in later presentations. So Nelson will be talking a lot about collaboration and a collaborative model for WAC leadership. Collaboration was mentioned 198 times in the corpus. Feminist orientations, or talking about feminism in relationship to WAC, was only mentioned 28 times, but Caitlin will be talking, I'm sorry, not Caitlin, Crystal will be talking a bit about a feminist approach to WAC leadership. And then again, we talked about the ways that whiteness and racial and social justice operate or do not in WAC contexts. And so I also wanted to show you how often terms like race, racism, language supremacy or linguistic supremacy, and whiteness were mentioned in the corpus. So opportunities there for more discussion based on how frequent these words are showing up. To close, I wanted to just talk about leadership a bit more. So I did drill down a little bit more into those 122 instances of the term leadership across the corpus to look at how that word was used in context. And the good news here is that about half of those instances did theorize leadership. So out of the 122, I was getting close to 50 mentions of that I was coding as leadership as theorized. So and also I noticed that leadership has been used more frequently in the last 3 issues of the WAC journal. But here are 2 ways that leadership is discussed as a role in context. The second example is an interesting one because it talks about leadership as a role, and how a man was able to use his leadership role in the WAC context to navigate complicated relational dynamics. This is Sarah Tabokia's article on gender dynamics and professional development in WAC. It's really, really interesting article. And one of the things I wanted to note here is that though Tabokia doesn't theorize leadership, because she's talking about gender dynamics in WAC, there are opportunities there for her to talk about how gender and leadership theory might intersect. And then I also wanted to show you an example of leadership as theorized, but without using the term leadership. So I also looked at vision and transformation and how those words were used in context. And in this example from Rebecca Fremo's article on multilingual learners in WAC writing classroom, WAC-related writing classrooms, she talked about the theorization of WAC leadership without even using the term leadership in this particular instance. I'll read a little bit of it because you'll see what I mean. We need to challenge ourselves, meaning WAC leaders, to make transformation in how our thinking, procedures, and pedagogy, as well as in our own professional identity, that is just as radical a shift for us as the ones we have been asking of our colleagues in the disciplines. So what's next? You know, really, I'm just posing a couple of questions to you all, which is, how do you theorize WAC leadership? And let's start to talk about it, because it can only benefit us if we're talking together about how we're thinking about vision and transformation of our programs. And then to bring us back to the broader contexts, global and national, around racial and social justice and equity, to what extent are social justice and active anti-racism part of your WAC leadership philosophy? I'll close by saying that in other fields, such as educational administration, which is not that distant from what we do, leadership philosophy is a common topic of scholarly interest. But our scholarly conversations have not explicitly taken up these threads. We're curious about why that is. Because WAC leaders most often serve at least part-time in administrative roles, we argue that explorations of leadership philosophies and theories as part of WAC can enrich our field and the scholarship and each other. Our panel calls for all of us to consider theoretical orientations to leadership as connected to both broader social and individual campus exigencies. And now it's going to Caitlin.
Thank you, Lisa. So the question that I want to offer everyone today is, how might empirical research help us understand leadership in WAC work? And I first became interested in this question while working on my dissertation, facilitating institutional change through writing-related faculty development. I noticed that WAC scholarship rarely explicitly mentioned leadership or change theories. There are some notable exceptions, including Michelle Cox, Jeff Galin, and Dan Melzer's Sustainable WAC book, William Condon and Carol Rutz's A Taxonomy of Writing Across the Curriculum Programs, and Barbara Walvoord's The Future of WAC. What I did notice, though, is that many early WAC leaders seem to adopt a grassroots approach to leadership and change. Both Elaine Mayman and Barbara Walvoord have discussed how their positions as untenured women leading WAC workshops led them to create spaces where faculty members of all ranks could meet as equals to discuss teaching writing. And Toby Fulweiler emphasized the need to show faculty members the power of using writing to learn in their classes, allowing them to participate in the same activities during a WAC workshop that they might incorporate into their courses. So the theme is, you can't simply tell faculty what to do, you need to allow them to experience it themselves. And so these are early choices that have seemed to lead to WAC leaders today continued uptake of transformative leadership approaches, strategies that may look very different to traditional conceptions of leadership in higher education. And so as part of my project, I wanted to better understand who currently leads WAC programs, their goals, and their views of leadership and change. So if we go to the next slide, please. My dissertation really only began to touch on these questions. I surveyed individuals who lead such faculty development programs to learn more about the goals of their work, the programs they developed to work towards these goals, and the kinds of changes that they had observed in their institutions that they would link to their work. I also conducted more in-depth research with leaders at 3 institutions to better understand these questions in local contexts. But in my portion of this presentation, I want to first share some relevant findings from survey research. And so I'm going to be sharing a lot of graphs with you today that I think will provide some broader context to the more localized conversations you're going to hear later in this panel. So let's get started on the next slide. So I'm going to begin with some institutional demographic information for the 51 individuals who responded to the survey. So you can see on the slide that the majority of respondents were from doctorate granting institutions, followed by master's granting institutions. Only 2% of respondents indicated that they were employed at an historically Black college or university, while 22% reported that their institution was an Hispanic serving institution. And one respondent wrote in an open-ended comment that their institution is an Asian American, Native American, Pacific Islander serving institution. And 73%, so the majority, also said that they were at publicly funded institutions. And so I share all of this to say that there is some range to the type of institutions represented in the survey data, but most of them are doctoral granting, which means that it might not actually look that different than the trends in the scholarship or the ways people talk about it in the scholarship, just given the differences in publication requirements across different institutional types. So if we go to the next slide. I also collected a variety of respondents' demographic data to better understand who leads WAC programs and from what kinds of institutional positions. And so I'm going to start with their institutional position. Most of the respondents to the survey were tenure-line faculty members, reflecting field recommendations that WPAs be hired into tenure-line positions. Some respondents said they were in non-tenure line faculty positions, and relatively few said that they held staff or administrative lines, which surprised me given the number of folks that I know who do this work from staff and administrative lines. So in terms of leadership, I just want to note that respondents in any of these positions might not be immediately recognized or recognize themselves as leaders at their institution. There's nothing that says a tenure line or a non-tenure line faculty member is not an institutional leader, but that might not be who you imagine when you first think of university leadership. And I really want to drive this point home because one of the individuals that I interviewed actually told me that, she did not see herself as an institutional leader despite being in the lower upper administrative ranks, because she saw her work as being a lot of listening and a lot of helping, and that wasn't something that she associated with leadership at her institution. And so just as people's institutional positions can impact what they're doing, their views of themselves as a leader might also be compounded by other aspects of their identity. So if we go to the next slide, you might not be surprised to see that the majority of the respondents to this survey were women. So about 75%, only 2% reported that they identify as non-binary. And in addition, no respondents indicated that they identified as a trans man or trans woman, and none chose to self-describe, though 2% did decline to respond. So on the next slide, some more demographic information. Most of the respondents to the survey identified as white. Only 2% identified as American Indian or Alaskan Native, and 2% as Native Hawaiian or Pacific Islander. No respondents said that they identify as Black or African American. And while it looks like no respondents identify as Asian, we do see Asian identifying individuals in the 8% who preferred to self-describe. So on the next slide, we'll see that these self-descriptions include Asian and Pacific Islander, mixed white and Asian, white identified, and mixed race. So these findings suggest that individuals who conduct writing-related faculty development work do so from a variety of institutional positions, some that hold more institutionally recognized cultural capital than others, yet their personal identities can also influence the ways that they do their work. And overall, survey respondents do not represent a diverse group of people. And while this does reflect broader trends in higher education and writing program administration, this is something that as a field we need to be aware of and actively working to remedy. So on the next slide. As Lisa said earlier, leadership involves not only sort of the day-to-day management of WAC programs, but also vision setting and transformation. And it's this idea of vision setting that I was particularly interested in. So I asked respondents about two types of change goals. Did they want to make conceptual change around writing, and did they want to make broader institutional change? And so I define conceptual change as changing faculty ideas, beliefs, and values around writing, and institutional change as seeking changes at the program, department, divisional, or institutional level, rather than working specifically with individual faculty in their classroom. And so these responses, they indicate that these might be widely shared goals of the field and part of this sort of national vision for WAC work. And so what I'd like to finish with to provide some more details are some ideas about writing that WAC leaders reported bringing into their programs that can provide some greater context for the kind of leadership we're striving for. So in the next slide. In the survey, I began by giving respondents a list of multiple ideas that I had adapted from the threshold concepts, Named and Naming What We Know, and Chris Anson's rearticulation of them specifically for WAC work. And so the 6 on this slide are the ones that over 90% of survey respondents indicated emphasizing in their faculty development programs. That learning to write requires time, practice, and feedback, that writing is a way to learn new material and ideas, that writing is influenced by one's own discipline, writing is not a general skill that can be mastered in a single class, teaching writing is a shared responsibility, and writing is rhetorical. And these are conceptions of writing that have been really mainstays of WAC work more broadly throughout its history, but they don't capture everything that is important in WAC work. And so I want to share a couple of open-ended responses to the question, what additional ideas about writing does your program offer that can show us what we might be missing if we're only looking at what everyone agrees on. So on the next slide. These ideas include things like writing as a site of social inequities and therefore also social justice, and writing as a space of regulation and racism. And to me, these indicate that WAC leaders are beginning to develop programs that can be sites of reckoning with some of the same broader conversations we're having in the field. And I think this is really important. I want to emphasize that WAC scholar Donna LaCour has noted that WAC does not and should not merely help faculty accommodate students in their discourse to specific disciplinary conventions, even though that is an assumption people have sometimes made about what WAC does. Ideas that underscore how writing plays a role in systemic inequities and oppression are key to realizing LaCour's ideas, and as is working towards making WAC programs and their institutional leaders a more diverse group. So on our final slide, if WAC leaders then want to make conceptual changes from locations that may not resemble stereotypical sites of institutional leadership, how can they do so? What leadership theories might be most useful to individuals of varying institutional positions and authority and with different goals for their programs? I hope you will consider further how this empirical research might help us answer these questions as we move into Crystal and Nelson's more localized discussion of their own programs and leadership. Thank you.
So today I'm going to be sharing my philosophy of context-responsive WAC leadership. Go to the next slide, please. So as a brief overview of the institutional context to which I respond, Moravian is a small private liberal arts university in Eastern Pennsylvania. I direct the Writing at Moravian program, which includes, but is not limited to, a first-year writing experience taught by mostly full-time faculty across the disciplines in rotation, a writing-enriched curriculum project, a writing center, and an undergraduate course-embedded writing fellows program. Next slide, please. I have a deep scholarly interest in how and why what genres are taken up in what contexts in response to what exigencies leading to what ends. And as a WAC leader, my desire to understand the genres, rhetorics, and epistemologies of disciplines overlaps with my desire to figure out how to teach students and faculty across the disciplines to be better able to locate the writing they do within these different contexts so that they can write more effectively within and beyond those contexts, teach others in turn to write effectively within and beyond them, and or acknowledge and dismantle ways of writing and writing assessment practices that cause harm to people of certain backgrounds within certain contexts. And to reference back to both Lisa and Caitlin, to do this work absolutely requires vision setting. In my case, that vision is guided by both the big questions and concerns of writing studies scholarship, like transfer and social justice, and by the idiosyncrasies of my local context. And my philosophy of WAC leadership grows out of what I see as a need to have a symbiotic understanding of both. That is, how to best facilitate the adoption of evidence-informed practices and conceptions about writing promoted in writing studies scholarship at my particular institution. Next slide. So in my work as a WAC leader, I strive to promote and embody the practices of reflection, rhetorical listening, and flexibility in order to understand, represent, and advocate for the diverse needs of students, faculty, and administrative collaborators across different contexts at Moravian. So Krista Ratcliffe explains that rhetorical listening signifies a stance of openness that a person may choose to assume in cross-cultural exchanges. And Heather Bastian suggests that rhetorical listening allows for writing program administrators to hear people's intersecting identifications with writing, their disciplines, and students. Moreover, she says, this kind of listening allows WPAs to understand their colleagues' problems and to collaboratively redefine those problems as opportunities. Early on in my time as a WAC director, back in 2014, rhetorical listening became an important tactic to use, not only to build connections with faculty members, but also to orient my work at Moravian for the future and discover the actual problems that faculty had so that the program I developed would be responsive to local concerns. For example, through an initial practice of meeting with and listening to faculty across all the departments and programs at Moravian as they reflected on their values and beliefs about disciplinary writing, I learned first and foremost in my private small liberal arts college context that faculty across the disciplines wanted a WAC leader who gave support through collaboration and guided reflection, not through policies and mandates. It was that understanding that led me to propose that Moravian adopt a writing enriched curriculum model that can be used to plan curricular revisions and develop departmental writing assessment tools that are responsive to the rich and diverse ways of knowing and communicating privileged and particular disciplinary contexts. It was also that understanding that led me to build the sort of ethos necessary to help faculty expand and change their conceptions about writing, which has been essential to the more recent writing transfer and social justice oriented work we've been doing in the program. Next slide, please. So it is my belief that a skilled writer from any discipline knows how to draw upon their individual semiotic resources and writing knowledge in socially just and evidence-informed ways to communicate in an accessible and inclusive manner with different audiences for different purposes in different genres and media, using a productive combination of not only linguistic elements, but also oral, visual, gestural, and spatial ones. Embedded in that claim are numerous writing threshold concepts, many of which faculty across the disciplines may or may not understand or agree with. Yet it is important for faculty to have productive conceptions of writing in order to be effective teachers of writing in their respective disciplines. In his 2019 dissertation, Enrique Paz claims that misconceptions of writing affect students' learning to write, and therefore writing instruction should attend to changing misconceptions to promote deep transformative learning around writing. To better ensure that productive conceptions of writing are being taught, as a WAC leader, I need to position myself as a liaison between writing conceptual knowledge and faculty who have various misconceptions about writing or who may underestimate the breadth of knowledges necessary to develop as a writer. For example, most recently, as part of Writing at Moravian's 2021 Writing Our Way to a Better Future initiative and programming, we have focused on something that Caitlin brought up earlier, the concepts that writing is a site of social inequities and that writing is a space of regulation and racism, with an end goal of getting as many first-year writing seminar and writing intensive course faculty as possible to sign up to pilot a labor-based contract grading program during the fall 2021 semester. Much of the recent work of our program has focused on facilitating undergraduate research and faculty reflection around universal design for learning, language diversity, and anti-racist writing pedagogy. Next slide, please. And the responsive to context core of my WAC leadership praxis has also led me to understand the role of WAC leader at the macro level as an activity systems analyst. So for example, in recent years, the Writing at Moravian program developed an infrastructure for what Dan Melzer calls a vertical writing transfer curriculum, using an application of activity theory to produce a programmatic vision that has been guiding the program's work. It makes sense to me to iteratively assess and revise the Writing at Moravian program using activity theory as a flexible tool that can lead to a consistent way of thinking about a dynamic, highly collaborative, and organically developed program that values the voices of local stakeholders. I want the program's activity itself to be clearly defined, the intellectual and material tools mediating the activity to be carefully chosen and based off of relevant writing study scholarship, the rules guiding the activity to be transparent and position faculty and students as decision-making agents who interact with the writing program to mutually transform the curriculum. When applying this heuristic for those purposes, I consider the questions provided on the slide related to different elements of an activity system, but in the interest of time, I will not go over them, so please feel free to screenshot them or email me. I have used this activity system framework with my team and the larger Writing at Moravian Advisory Committee to make decisions, from what guest speakers we should invite to campus to help actualize the program's mission, to considerations about how and why undergraduate researchers could contribute to curricular initiatives and programmatic assessment efforts. And my last slide. So ongoing input from students, faculty, administrators, and affiliated professionals gained through programmatic processes that emerged within the Writing at Moravian activity system has led me to promote Writing on Moravian's campus as a situated social activity, a superpower in the program's marketing, with an emphasis on writing as agentive knowledge production that should be taken seriously for its powerful potential. So our programmatic key terms, National Day on Writing activities, reflection prompts for certain campus-wide events, our program's assignment design guide, and other programmatic artifacts now take this as a given and move the discourse around writing at the institution to be less about classroom-based genres completed mostly in service to developing or illustrating content knowledge, and more about the meaningful writing that may be possible when writing studies threshold concepts intersect with the student learning goals of faculty across the disciplines. Last year, the program's advisory committee changed the annual student writing prize from an academic writing prize to a public writing prize that promotes and awards the successful transformation of academic writing into forms suitable to share with audiences outside of our fields of study. We've got WHAM, Writing is Our Superpower stickers on laptops and water bottles of students affiliated with the writing program around campus. And this experience has shown me that it is possible to foster a culture of writing on a campus, one that energizes those involved when they recognize that their writing and the teaching of writing matter for reasons that extend far beyond assessment. So to conclude, the WAC leadership philosophy that I've shared today is one that I understand as a feminist one, grounded in non-hierarchical collaborative decision-making, thus acknowledging through my actions and my expertise and research supported conceptions about writing best serve others in an ongoing theory-informed and evidence-responsive implementation of collaboratively generated curricular interventions and faculty development initiatives designed to support student writers. And it is with an ongoing commitment to openness and to the co-creation of a WAC program's vision, mission, innovations, curricular emphasis, and particular contextually situated teaching avocations that I continue to approach the complex job of promoting and striving to sustain effective and inclusive writing and writing instruction across disciplines and departments at my institution. Thank you.
Thank you all. So I'll pick up with a story of sorts of the ways that leadership has been invitation and collaboration for me at California State University, Monterey Bay. Next slide, please. So Cal State Monterey Bay is a public institution in the California State University system. It's in the central coast of California. We're a mid-sized university, about 7,500 students. We're a Hispanic serving institution. This is formerly the Fort Ord military base. It's a young institution, started in 1994. It's also the ancestral home of the Esalen people. The writing initiatives that are in place are a first-year writing requirement, junior level writing requirement. And then the two initiatives that I'll talk about today are reading apprenticeship professional learning and a reading writing enriched curriculum project. So having some of the same roots as Crystal's writing enriched curriculum program. All right, next slide, please. So first I'll introduce you to the two initiatives that I'm talking about. Reading apprenticeship actually comes to me through my work as an English educator. So I used to, before I came to Cal State Monterey Bay, I worked in English education, preparing high school teachers, and also in a master's program preparing future college instructors, and adopted the reading apprenticeship framework. This is a framework of instruction in reading that models learning disciplines or learning problem solving in terms of the four dimensions, social, personal, knowledge building, and cognitive, and centers on metacognitive conversation. And really, as the slide describes, it's a partnership of expertise between the teacher and students. Several of us have mentioned so far this idea of transfer of learning and bringing that transfer in terms of what problem solving skills we have already and our students have already coming into the class, and sharing the expertise of content area instructors. So both Lisa and Crystal have talked about conceptual change. Actually, all three, Caitlin does as well, talked about conceptual change. And so thinking about what content area instructors know and do as readers and problem solvers, that helps to lead the conceptual change for faculty necessary to see themselves as reading and writing instructors. Next slide, please. The other project is a reading and writing enriched curriculum project. And this draws on the work, actually I'll get to that in the next slide, but it's a faculty-driven model to support the curricular integration of relevant reading, writing, and reading, writing instruction. And the idea here is that reading, writing instruction is not, as already has come up, it's not something that just belongs in composition classes, not something that's news to anyone in WAC scholarship, but where this really sort of moves is in that direction of conceptual change that is helping our disciplinary colleagues recognize their roles as reading and writing instructors. Next slide, please. So this is based on the writing enriched curriculum model from University of Minnesota, where they have writing plans across the university, and the work of Pamela Flash has really spread this across the country, this model across the country. Next slide, please. So when I thought about how to talk about this in terms of leadership, and in particular in terms of invitation and collaboration, I really thought of the timeline of my being at Cal State Monterey Bay and the partners that I've had in each of these initiatives. So when I arrived at Cal State Monterey Bay, as I said, I came in with an English education background, very familiar with the reading apprenticeship model. As Crystal did, I began by listening to faculty at the institution. And one of the big pieces that I heard from the faculty was that they were concerned about students reading, that students were not doing the reading in the classes, and when students were doing the reading, they weren't understanding it. And So because I arrived in a relatively new position, although there had been our university writing program director, that's what we called it when I arrived, for quite some time, the last full-time person in that position had been several years before. And so I was walking into essentially a position that didn't have a history of writing across the curriculum in the same sense that other programs do. Cal State Monterey Bay identifies as very interdisciplinary. And so there was a sense that first year writing was owned around the curriculum, but not much sense that upper division writing was owned across the curriculum. The other aspect that I came into was a well-developed and well-respected Office of Teaching, Learning, and Assessment. And so I knew when I arrived that what was going to be necessary was for me to partner with that Office of Teaching, Learning, and Assessment in terms of reaching out to departments, in terms of professional development. And so one of the stories that the director at that time of TLA tells is that on my very first day on campus, I came into his office and slapped down on his desk the book Reading for Understanding that describes reading apprenticeship and said, okay, based on what I'm hearing from faculty, this is what we need to do. And so this is where serendipity comes in because in the next summer, the office, the CSU-wide, California State University-wide Institute for Teaching and Learning had a summer institute. And one of the sessions that they offered was about reading apprenticeship. And so because I had planted that seed, the director and faculty liaison went to that session and we agreed to pick that up, to take on reading apprenticeship. And so part of this story is a story of taking advantage of existing leadership on the campus. And part of it is a story of luck. So the other thing that happened is that the Institute for Teaching and Learning had its own partnerships outside of Cal State Monterey Bay and outside of the Cal State. One of them was with an organization called the California Community College Success Network, or 3CSN. And so when CSUMB started picking up on reading apprenticeship, we made connections with 3CSN and with West Ed, which was publishing the reading apprenticeship book. And that led to 3CSN coming in and giving workshops on the campus, teaching, learning, and assessment, and communication across the discipline, going to trainings at West Ed in order to become, sort of training of trainers so that we could do our own professional learning workshops at CSUMB. The other thing that happened in 2017 is that our chancellor's office realigned general education, and that exigence provided an opportunity. Because of the changes in general education, we were eliminating remediation, and that created the need to provide more support to students who would not necessarily be considered college ready for the courses that they would be taking. And some of the folks who had participated in early professional development on reading apprenticeship were in the math and stat department, and they realized that one of the best ways that they could help their entering students was to adopt reading apprenticeship into their first year writing classes, their first year math classes. The next year that led to professional development for the math and stat department, and a continuing cycle of open professional development for faculty around the campus. As we continued with that professional development, the campus was also developing an integrated GE program. And because of the years of work around the campus in reading apprenticeship, or at least metacognitive reading and problem solving were written into our new GE program. Next slide. So because of the early adopters of reading apprenticeship, I had built relationships with faculty in math stat, a lot in the College of Science. And so when the University of Minnesota offered their first WAC Institute, I attended, and I brought faculty from math stat, biology, and applied environmental science to that workshop. And so now our collaboration stretched through the departments, but also across to Pamela Flash and University of Minnesota. That led to our applying for an NEH grant, bringing Pamela Flash as a consultant, and beginning the reading, writing, and rich curriculum process with departments that had already been working with us for reading apprenticeship. And then this continues to develop with another grant and hiring a half-time project coordinator. Next slide, please. So the commonalities between these two initiatives are first that the invitations were based on perceived need. So as Krista was talking about, it started from what faculty knew that they needed. One of the interesting things was, going through the experience of helping faculty see that they were reading teachers, and that it was necessary in math and stat to have faculty think about students reading in math classes rather than just lecturing. The participation for all of the faculty engaged and for the departments engaged converged because of their interest and external exigences. So the elimination of remediation provided an external exigence for us. The opportunity offered by the WAC Institute provided an external exigence for us. And then they also provided kairotic moments. So the resources were there for us at particular times, and that allowed us to expand. And then the final insight is that partnerships build. So starting small, beginning to build partnerships with individual offices and then departments has led to an increasing snowball of reaching across the university and reaching across departments. Thank you.
Thank you. So this ends our presentation, and as you know, this is a recording, but somewhere in the future, we are also present in this session. So we are going to end this part of the recorded part of the presentation and open it up to questions or discussion. Here's all of our contact information, and thank you so much for joining us today. I'm going to stop the share. We're all going to we'll see our other Zoom faces in a minute. Bye.